Werewolves.
Good evening, my friends. It is DM Dungeon Mastery here with another 2014 rework. And this time, we're doing the werewolf. So, before I get into this 2014 stat block, let's just look at a little tidbit of lore from the 2014 Monster Manual and see what we're dealing with. So, a werewolf is a savage predator. In its humanoid form, a werewolf has heightened senses, a fiery temper, and a tendency to eat rare meat. I think it means rare in the uncooked sense. Its wolf form is a fearsome predator, but its hybrid form is more terrifying by far. A furred and well-muscled humanoid body topped with a ravening wolf's head. A werewolf can wield weapons in its hybrid form, though it prefers to tear foes apart with its powerful claws and bite. Most werewolves flee civilized lands not long after becoming afflicted. Those that reject the curse fear what will happen to them if they remain among their friends and family. Those that embrace the curse fear discovery and the consequences of their murderous acts. In the wild, werewolves form packs that also includes wolves and dire wolves. Interesting. Hey, listen! This is Adbreak DM Dungeon Mastery, and I'm grateful for your support. Check out my Patreon for exclusive content like monthly battle maps, patron-only voting, and access to private Discord channels for feedback and sneak peeks on upcoming reworks. Anyways, thanks for being awesome. Back to the video. So, I want to get into the 2014 werewolf stat block first, but I would also like to talk about some things that should be present in the werewolf stat block. Silver shouldn't just be something that you could brush over, in my opinion, and just, well, I have a magic weapon, so it's superior to a silver weapon. Well, yes, that may be true in most cases, 99% of them. It should be the sole way to slay a werewolf. I don't like how magic weapons trump everything else. Not that it shouldn't, but for certain creatures, like the werewolf, I think it should be unique in that you really need to have a silvered weapon, just like its mythology. They don't really speak about quote-unquote magic in mythology, so the silvered weapon should be really important. But what are three key words that really describe a werewolf? We're looking at savage, predatory, and infectious. So with that out of the way, let's get into the 2014 werewolf. Okay, what are we working with? We got a medium humanoid, and this is stating that this is a human when it's not the werewolf, and it is chaotic evil. So, when it is in its werewolf form, you could argue that it's probably a monstrosity and not a humanoid for the spells like Hold Person, but it is still just a polymorphed human in a way. So, I don't know, the werewolf polymorphs with its actual shape change ability, so you could probably argue that it's not a human anymore once it's in its werewolf form. Let's move on. So we have an armor class of 11 in humanoid form, or 12 natural armor in its wolf or hybrid form. We have 58 hit points, we have a speed of 30 feet, and a speed of 40 feet in wolf form. Its ability scores look good. I don't think anything needs to be changed. It kind of looks like just an average commoner turned into a werewolf and got extra stats based on the werewolf. So it's got a 10 in charisma and intelligence, but everything else has a little bit of a bonus to it. So strength has 15, dex has 13, con has 14. Now perception is its first and only skill that it has. I feel like it should have survival and maybe nature, just because they live out away from society most of the time. They can live in society. These could be very dangerous if they actually are evil humanoids that are trying to blend in with society and turn into werewolves and pretty much slaughter an entire village from the inside, getting into the gates or what have you. So werewolves could be pretty scary because they're deceptive. It's two creatures in one. That's what most of the werewolf stat block is kind of representing. It's a double creature. So let's look at its damage immunities here. Bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks not made with silvered weapons. So basically what that says is your players 9 times out of 10 are just going to skip the silvered weapon and get a magical weapon somehow, unless you make it a point in your campaign not to give them magic weapons and make them get a silvered weapon. But I don't know, that just bothers me. It's the flavor of the werewolf is silvered weapons should be the priority. I think there's monsters that have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing even if it's from magical attacks. Barbarians have that. It doesn't matter if you're using magical slashing damage, they still resist that slashing damage no matter what. So why can't the werewolves have it? Moving on, perception of 14. Now, do you notice something that's missing here? The werewolf has no dark vision. The werewolf cannot see in the dark. Is that, to me, that's uncalled for. It offends me, and it's a little weird. I think they maybe just forgot to add it as an oversight. I looked up and I confirmed wolves in real life can see in the dark. So I think a werewolf should be able to see in the dark with dark vision. They speak common, but they can't speak in their wolf form, obviously. Challenge rating 3. Pretty low barrier to entry already with the werewolf, with only a challenge rating 3. Lower level parties can fight werewolves, but you throw them against high level parties and they're not special. High level parties have magic weapons, they have spells, so the werewolf is going to be nothing but a flavorful version of an orc with slightly higher hit points. I hate to say it, but that's really what they become because of how their immunities and resistances work. Let's move into the special traits. Alright, so we have Shape Changer. The werewolf can use its action to polymorph into a wolf-humanoid hybrid, or into a wolf, or back into its true form, which is humanoid. That's a very wordy, roundabout way to just say it could change into stuff. Its statistics, other than its AC, are the same in each form. Any equipment it is wearing or carrying isn't transformed, and it reverts to its true form if it dies. So if you kill a werewolf, it slowly morphs back into whatever it was. Funnily enough, I don't know if most of you know this, but werewolves can actually infect giants, not just humanoids. So yes, that implies that giant werewolves can exist. That's foreshadowing for later in this video. But let's keep moving here. Keen hearing and smell. This is a flavorful ability, it makes sense. They have advantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on hearing or smell. That's a kind of a way to get around the lack of dark vision. They can use hearing and smell to track you in the dark versus actual dark vision, but I think they should still have dark vision. And that's it for the special traits. Nothing that shows you that the werewolf should be nearly impervious to things that are not silvered. Now, I don't want to say that, you hit it with a spell and you can't kill it. That should be okay, but we're lacking in the special traits that make the werewolf unique. There's really nothing that make this unique other than Shape Changer. Everything else, you could pretty much find that in a common creature. Let's move on to the actions, shall we? Alright, so we got the multi-attack, humanoid or hybrid form only. So if you're the werewolf really doesn't have a reason to turn into the wolf, as far as I can tell. I mean, why would it want to turn into a wolf other than to get into small spaces, I guess, but I just don't see a reason it would turn into a wolf over just turning into the werewolf. So, the werewolf makes 2 attacks, 2 with its spear as a human, or 1 with its bite and 1 with its claws in hybrid form. Now we look at this, the bite. This is the iconic werewolf ability. This is the only thing that I really feel is iconic on this stat block. So when it bites you, it does 1d8 piercing damage, and you have to succeed on a DC 12 con save or be cursed with werewolf lycanthropy. So that is the coolest ability on the stat block as a whole. Everything else really, in my opinion, is just boring. I hate to say it because werewolves are supposed to be really cool, but it's just boring. It doesn't have anything fun. We have a claw attack, which does 2d4 slashing damage. So it does up to 8 slashing damage plus its modifier. It'll have more consistent damage than the bite because there's 2 die instead of a singular die, but it on average isn't going to hit as high. I think it should be able to make 2 claw attacks, and if it wants to, replace one with a bite attack. That way it has a choice in what it wants to do, but also the claws and the bite should do something else. Werewolves are meticulous and predatory. They hunt weak creatures. They single out weaker creatures, just like wolves in real life. They'll circle around something that's weak and they'll wait, pick it off one by one, especially if they're hunting like a group of deer or something. That's what the werewolves should do, but to a more devastating extent, because they're obviously humanoid-esque werewolves. I guess that's the best way I could describe it. You know what I'm trying to say. Alright, let's move to its final ability here. It's just a spear attack. As its humanoid form, you have a spear, and you know what a spear does. It does 1d6 piercing or 1d8 piercing if you have 2 hands on it. So, all in all, 2014 Werewolf is pretty lacking in my opinion. So let me show you what I came up with. Okay, so let's get into it here. First things first, I reworked this stat block from top to bottom. I changed just about everything that you could change on a stat block, except the ability scores. So you'll see with the name, I said lycanthrope, werewolf. So that more so defines it solidly what it is, because there's multiple different types of lycanthropes. I know a lycan is supposed to mean werewolf, but for the sake of D&D terms, it's a lycanthrope. So you can see I took the very weird wording out with armor class, and I just said, I think most of you are going to be using this in the werewolf form. So the werewolf form comes first, and then after that it says as a humanoid, it has 11 AC. You get to the hit points, 58. And then when it's bloodied, it's at 29. So if it has bloodied in the hit points, that means I might have added something to it. Speed has not changed, but I cleaned up the speed wording a little bit. I just said 40 feet as the werewolf, 30 feet as the humanoid. Most of you are going to be using this for the werewolf form, but if you want to make a character that's more in depth, you still have the humanoid part of it. Let's move into the rest of the stats here. We have saving throw proficiencies. I think it should have these if it's mutated by a curse into a muscle-bound, superhuman-esque creature. It should have strength, con, and wisdom. Those make sense to me. The wisdom comes from the wolf, the con comes from the wolf also, and the strength proficiency comes from the wolf. So yeah, those are befitting of a werewolf in my opinion. Athletics, perception, and survival are the 3 skill proficiencies I gave it. You can see it has expertise in perception, so that keen hearing and smell is represented with that. Now, this is the biggest change on the stat block. Damage resistances to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from magical attacks. Now that also means from pretty much all non-magical damage too. I just realized after reading that that's going to imply that you can... Well, actually, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I caught myself. So, yeah, if you have a magical weapon now, you're still only dealing half damage. You still deal full damage with spells and things like that, but actually, yeah, you do. Bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from magical attacks is now halved. So that effectively, if you're using regular weapons trying to kill the werewolf, it's going to effectively double its hit points if you don't have spellcasters hitting it constantly. Damage immunities are the same, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. So if you don't have a magic weapon and you try to hit the werewolf, it takes no damage. Unless it's silvered or a magical weapon, you're not damaging the werewolf. That's kind of how it should be. Moving on. I gave it a dark vision of 60 feet. Makes sense. Should have dark vision. Don't know why it didn't. Not gonna throw shade at Wizards of the Coast this video, even though I'm throwing shade at Wizards of the Coast all the time. But yeah, so you can see at the challenge rating here, oh, excuse me, it's a CR6 monster now instead of a CR3. So let's keep moving into the special traits now. Okay, the first special trait we're gonna look at is Relentless Predator. The werewolf can track a creature by scent for up to 5 miles. If the creature is bleeding or missing any hit points, that range extends to 10 miles. The werewolf has advantage on wisdom perception checks relying on hearing or smell, so I combined keen hearing and smell with Relentless Predator. But now, if you're bleeding and this creature is coming after you, there is very little you can do to escape other than flying away and going as far as you humanly possibly can. I think that's a flavorful ability. I kind of got the idea from League of Legends Warwick, how he tracks you when you're hurt. But I think that's pretty iconic for a werewolf. I mean, wolves track injured creatures, sharks track injured creatures, predatory creatures can smell blood from really far away, usually. So I think that's a fitting ability. Let's look at Undying Curse. This is the first thing. So with the werewolf, the biggest changes you're going to see are in the special traits. This is what's going to completely change how you play with a werewolf now. So, if the lycanthrope is killed and not struck down with a silver weapon, it rises again at next dusk as long as its body is intact. So now silver is important all of a sudden. So unless you completely obliterate the body with something like disintegration, or you literally hack it up and incinerate the body, essentially, the werewolf is coming back to life. But your players won't know that. They're definitely not going to know that the first time you run a werewolf that I made against your players. And they're going to be quite surprised now, because let's say, you know, you fight a werewolf right before nightfall. You end up slaying it. You go and you rest at your camp a couple miles away. Well, you're all still injured. Relentless Predator happens. That werewolf just came back. You decide whether or not they come back with all their hit points or not. But yeah, pretty cool, pretty flavorful. Let's move to the next one. Hunt the Wounded. So a lot of people were saying that werewolves should be these savage creatures that hunt injured prey, pretty much. So what this says is the lycanthrope has advantage on melee attacks against any creature that is lacerated or bloodied, and we'll get into lacerated later on. But bloodied, if you don't understand what that means you are at half hit points or fewer. So now, the more injured you get, the more savage the werewolf gets. The more they start targeting you, because they can hit you easier. The weaker you're getting, the stronger the werewolf is getting. So they get stronger with the scent of blood. That's kind of how it should be. They're savage and they want to eat humanoid flesh. That's what drives them in their curse. So let's move to the next one. Somebody pointed out that 2 werewolves in the vanilla stat block, if they went at each other, would not be able to damage one another, because they didn't have magical attacks and their weapons are not... They would just be able to not damage each other, essentially. So I gave them cursed weapons. So while they're in their werewolf form, their weapon attacks are magical. So now if 2 werewolves fought each other, they would be able to damage each other, which makes sense, right? And that also helps against player characters too, who have resistance to non-magical attacks. Let's get into the next one. Lycanthropic Regeneration. The lycanthrope regains 10 hit points at the start of its turn if it has at least 1 hit point remaining. It doesn't regenerate if it has taken damage from a silvered weapon since the start of its last turn. Now, looking at this, remember it's not exactly like a troll, so you can still kill it, but the only way to stop its regeneration is with the silvered weapon. So the werewolf is immediately so much more formidable now, especially if you only have weapons and you're not casting spells. It's taking half damage from all your swings, and it's regenerating 10 hit points at the start of its turn. That's much more cool. It says in their lore that werewolves regenerate. So like when you hack at a werewolf with a longsword that's not silvered or magical, you could still hack a werewolf's arm off, but unless you use a silvered weapon, that arm is going to instantaneously regrow in a froth of gore as the werewolf is just snarling at you, and that's pretty much sealing your doom. So now the werewolf is going to be much more formidable. It's not just going to be an orc that makes bite and claw attacks, essentially. That's pretty much what a werewolf was before my rework. But I'm not done yet. We have one more special trait to look at here. Feral Takedown. Werewolves are these savage wolves. Imagine a werewolf running at you on all fours and then hitting you at full force. That's probably going to do a lot to you. So, similar to the Minotaur, if the lycanthrope moves at least 10 feet straight towards a target and hits it with a bite attack on the same turn, the target takes an extra 1d8 piercing damage, or if it's injured in any way, so if it's not at full hit points, 1d10. If the target is a creature, it must succeed on a DC 13 strength save or be knocked prone. I should probably change that to larger, smaller creatures, because I don't think a werewolf should be able to charge into a giant and knock it prone. So I will be adding that before I post these to the Discord, but you can see now, werewolves, if you ever played Stronghold Legends, werewolves kind of run with this, like, gait on all fours, almost like a wolf, and then when they get into melee combat, they stand up on their hind legs and start clawing into you. That's what I was imagining when they use this. And they do act like predators, so they would charge into something, bite into it, you know, whip their heads around while it's chomping on it and try to pull it to the ground. So I think that's a befitting ability of a werewolf. Now let's move into the actions. This is what everybody wants to see. Okay, so first things first, multi-attack. The lycanthrope makes 2 attacks, either 2 with its mace or 2 with its claws, and it can replace a claw attack with 1 bite attack. When it's bloodied, however, it makes 4 claw attacks and may replace 1 with a bite attack. So the more you start damaging a werewolf, the more dangerous they get. They start getting desperate. They start getting more savage, more cornered animal-like, and they start making more attacks on you. That actually comes from a creature in D&D 5th edition. It is an orc. Can't remember. It's the Orc Claw of Luthic. It's the female orc. When she gets to half hit points or fewer, she can make 4 claw attacks instead of 2. I took that right from her stat block, and I said that immediately feels like a werewolf ability. Also, reminds me of Warwick from League of Legends, but I think he's a good example of how a werewolf should be, so kind of used him for a little bit of inspiration. So now let's move into the bite with that stuff in mind. Obviously, wolf or hybrid form only. Still has a +5 to hit, I believe, unless it was lower than that beforehand. But it's got a reach of 5 feet. Does 1d8 piercing damage. Ooh, excuse me, sorry. 1d8 piercing damage. But now if you're missing hit points, they deal more damage. So instead of 1d8, it's 1d10 if you're not at full hit points. So it's like they smell blood. They're hungry. They want you, so they start fighting more ferociously. And now you'll see humanoids and giants must succeed on a DC 13 con save. Failure, they're cursed with werewolf lycanthropy. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Imagine turning a hill giant into a werewolf. Wouldn't that be crazy if there was a stat block for that? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Let's keep moving here. We have the claws. This is going to be much more deadly than the other werewolf. Warning you guys right now. But this is where if the creature is lacerated from earlier on in the stat block comes in. So it does 2d4 slashing damage. Creatures that can bleed are lacerated. So they take 1 slashing damage at the start of each turn per laceration until receiving magical healing or succeeding on a DC 12 medicine check with a healer's kit or similar means. So if you have a druid with like healing moss or something, you could make a DC 12 medicine check with that. It says damage stacks with each successful hit. What that means is every time you get hit with one of these claws, you start taking a point of slashing damage at the start of each of your turns. So it would go from 1 point if you get hit once, 2 points if you get hit twice. If you get hit 4 times, that's 4 points of slashing damage at the start of each of your turns. So it's essentially supposed to represent you're bleeding, you're wounded, and you need to heal those wounds. So if you get any magical healing at all, so a point of healing from something, or you take a healing potion, you drink a healing potion, it heals your wounds, so your wounds close. But that kind of makes sense for a werewolf, right? They have these massive claws, they're gonna rend into you and make you bleed, and that in turn makes them fight stronger, fight harder, fight faster against you. If you're wanting to get creative, you could say if a player character has heavy armor, like plate armor, maybe they don't get lacerated, but I think they should. It just makes sense. For me, it makes sense. I know that's my catchphrase. It just makes sense. I'm gonna have to put that on a t-shirt too one day. Let's look at Shape Changer. I took Shape Changer from the special traits and I put it in the actions. Cleans up the stat block a little bit. Does the same thing. However, you'll notice I added something at the end because this wasn't on the original stat block. What is every werewolf's iconic thing? They turn into a werewolf under a full moon. That's the whole werewolf mythos. So I added, under a full moon, the werewolf transforms into its hybrid form involuntarily. So there you go with that. That should increase the cool factor of the werewolf at least a little bit for you. Now, in its humanoid form, I gave it a mace and a light crossbow, so now it actually has a melee weapon and a ranged weapon. The spear was cool too. You could give it the spear. I just thought a mace and a light crossbow were cool, so I wanted to just give it a little bit more variety. And it can't attack twice with the light crossbow though, so it's still just a 2 mace attacks and that's it. We have one bonus action here, Predatory Onslaught. The lycanthrope makes a claw attack against a bloodied creature. So you can kind of see the theme with the werewolf now is savage, predatory, and infectious. That's the 3 things I wanted to make sure the werewolf was. It's predatory in the sense that the more that it starts picking you and ripping into your flesh, beating you down, injuring you, the more the pack is going to target you. So you start bleeding and you start taking more damage because you're bleeding, and the werewolves start hitting you easier because you're bleeding. So that's just meant to kind of show that these creatures are savage. They are forces of a cursed nature, essentially. Just evil wolf monster on steroids is what a werewolf should be. I think I captured that fairly accurately. Now, I made a couple variants of this stat block because a CR6 werewolf, you know, that might make a couple people mad and you want to run it against some lower level characters. So let's look at a young werewolf next. Okay, so we got the young lycanthrope werewolf. Now, young is subjective. You could take that as it's a literal young person that is turned into a werewolf, or you could take it as it's somebody who just recently was infected with lycanthropy. This is basically just a lower level werewolf for you to run against lower level parties. So looking at this werewolf, it has much lower health, its stats are lower, so its ability scores are a little lower. Yeah, they are lower. It's lacking a couple saving throw proficiencies. It's missing its wisdom saving throw, but it still has its resistances in the same exact way. So this is still going to be that scary werewolf that your players run into. This is meant to be sort of, I envisioned it, it's just a farmer that was turned into a werewolf. So all of the stuff is the same, but you will notice that it is lacking its takedown ability, so it doesn't deal too much damage, and its regeneration trait is slightly weaker, only regenerating 5 hit points at the start of its turn instead of 10. So, yeah, it is just a scaled down version of my werewolf. But you could still use it if you want to have fun with a werewolf, you just don't want to kill your party too easily with a CR6 monster. Now, it still has the same type of multi-attack actions, however you'll notice in its humanoid form it does not have multi-attack, so meant to represent that it's a farmer. All of its savageness comes from the werewolf inside of it. It does less damage with its bite, from a D8 to a D6. Its claws do 1d4 instead of 2d4. It still does lacerate you, so that's still part of the overall theme of the werewolf. And you'll see that its weapons in its humanoid form are much weaker. It has a sickle and a rock. Both deal 1d4 damage on a hit, and they don't really do much other than that. So let's say you corner this guy and you're supposed to be interrogating him, and then he turns into a werewolf, and you think you were just interrogating a farmer, but he's not a farmer, he's a werewolf. Or this is Jebediah, the farmer that's contacting the party because his animals are going missing in the middle of the night, and he doesn't know what's happening, and then it turns out he's the reason they're going missing. He's turning into a werewolf at night and eating them all during the full moons. So yeah, just a simple downscaled version of my werewolf in every way, something for you to run at lower levels. Let's go to the next werewolf. Alright, so every werewolf needs an alpha, right? If there's a pack of werewolves, you want to have an alpha. And you'll notice I did change the alignment to these werewolves to chaotic neutral and not evil. I only did that because it states that if you embrace the curse, you become chaotic evil. If you resist the curse and you don't actually want the curse, but you have it, you become neutral. But the chaos comes from the werewolf itself inside of you. But this is the first teaser that the werewolves can turn giants into werewolves. This is an ogre lycanthrope, so it has much higher health. Its bloodied condition is, half of its high health. Its stats are much larger, so it's got 19 strength, 19 con, 15 dex, 19 wisdom, 10 intelligence, 10 charisma. Its saving throw proficiencies are all really high with +7s across the board. It's got athletics, nature, perception, survival. This is supposed to be the leader of a pack of werewolves, so I feel like it should have really good saving throw proficiencies and skill proficiencies. This comes in at a CR7. I would argue it's probably much higher than that. I tried to do CR calculations on it, and I wasn't able to really... To be honest with you, I don't like the CR calculation system. It's very annoying to try to do. But, just going through here quickly, special traits are all the same other than Feral Takedown does more damage, so it does 2d8 extra damage, or if you're injured it does 2d10 extra damage. Its Bite attack does more damage under its actions, its Claw attack does 2d6 instead of 2d4, and it has a couple special alpha werewolf abilities here. So we have Shepherd's Howl is its first one. This is only done in its hybrid or wolf form. Most of that is pretty self-explanatory, but it howls once a day and it can summon nearby wolves and werewolves to fight with it. You roll a d6 on a 1 to 4, 1d8 plus 2 wolves are summoned, acting on the alpha's initiative, and then on a 5 to 6, 1d4 plus 1 lycanthrope werewolves are summoned, acting on the alpha's initiative. This is an optional ability. You don't have to have this. If you don't want it, you can take it out if you think it's a little BS. I just wanted to have something that kind of let the werewolf summon other wolves. I feel like the alpha would be the one to do that anyways, not just an average werewolf. Now we have Alpha's Directive. This is an action, so it doesn't make any attacks. Instead, he roars a commanding howl. Each ally lycanthrope within 60 feet that can hear it can use a reaction to make a melee attack against a creature it has advantage against. So you have to be lacerated or bloodied for the werewolves to have advantage against you. I also forgot, I have to go back to the special traits really quick. Sorry, I know I'm all over the place, but these are exciting to get through, and I have so many of them, so I want to get through all of them. But I also gave it Pack Leader. So he gives allied lycanthropes and wolves within 60 feet of him pack tactics. And I have a little thing that tells you what pack tactics does if you don't know what it does. It gives advantage on attack rolls against hostile creatures within 5 feet of an ally that is not incapacitated. So, pretty cool. Now, I wanted it to be good in its humanoid form too. Or this would be its giant form. So, in his ogre form, he has action surge once per rest, like a fighter does. And he has a large mace and a large javelin. So, just tried to keep the theme of 2 creatures in 1, giving you a little bit of extra stuff you could do, so you could fool your players into thinking they're just fighting a regular ogre that's surprisingly much smarter than a regular ogre that they would run into, and then suddenly he turns into a werewolf that's the size of an ogre, and it's like, holy shit, what are we fighting? Shape changer and all that's the same, everything else is the same. Let's get into the bonus actions. We have Deathly Howl as its 1 recharge ability. So he unleashes a terrifying howl. Each creature of his choice within 30 feet that can hear him must make a DC 15 wisdom save. On a failure, they are frightened for 1 minute. It can repeat the save at the end of each turn, ending itself on a success. And then on a success, you're immune to the howl until the next dusk. So, excuse me. Overall, pretty cool boss monster to have with a bunch of other werewolves. So this just helps you scale into the late game. Now, what if you're out there and you're saying, I don't care about the humanoid and the giant form, I just want to run the werewolf? Well, unlike Denethor of Gondor, I care about my children. And I have something for you too, my son. Let me get into that one next. Okay, so here we go. This is a Moon Frenzied werewolf. I took Moon Frenzy from 4th edition. It used to be what was in place of the werewolves spreading lycanthropy, but I wanted to make it just essentially a type of werewolf. So everything is the same on this werewolf except it cannot shape change back into a humanoid. It is just a werewolf. So you can see I took out humanoid. It is a medium monstrosity. This is the chaotic evil werewolf, okay? So it has a 40-foot movement speed. Everything is the same other than, yeah, it can't turn into a humanoid. So it's much more simple to look at if you're just trying to run the werewolf. Now, this has one unique thing though. It has Moon Frenzy. Now, what this does is a bloodied creature hit with a melee attack by the werewolf with Moon Frenzy is cursed. So there's no save. If you were hit by this creature and you are bloodied, so if you are at half hit points or fewer, you get cursed with Moon Frenzy, which can be removed with a remove curse spell. But now you have to succeed on a DC 13 wisdom save at the end of each turn. On a failure, it causes you to make a melee attack against a random target within movement range on your next turn. So if you have a 30-foot movement speed and something is within that 30-foot movement speed, you determine it randomly and you run towards that creature and you make an attack on it. If no target is available, you move in a random direction. So you're going insane. It's like rabies. Now, if you fail by 5 or more, you go berserk and you attack all creatures you can see as enemies until the curse is removed by a remove curse or similar magic. Outside of combat, you make this save once per hour. So when you go berserk, pretty much you have no allies anymore. You are just a madman. You go psycho. You get rabies. Werewolf rabies. So this now also states, when a werewolf with Moon Frenzy spreads lycanthropy, the newly transformed lycanthrope must make a DC 13 wisdom save or contract Moon Frenzy, lasting until the lycanthropy is cured. So it also states that a lycanthrope with Moon Frenzy cannot transform back into its humanoid form. So if you get turned into a werewolf by a werewolf with Moon Frenzy, you are stuck as a werewolf. And you are not just a regular werewolf, you are a crazy madman werewolf. So you'll notice too, when you kill a Moon Frenzied werewolf, they don't transform back into their humanoid form because they have become the werewolf. They have lost themselves to become the werewolf. I think this is a cool werewolf if you just want, you don't care about the humanoid part of the creature, you just want the werewolf. This is a good choice for you. But, of course there's gotta be something bigger than this, right? Something larger. Something scarier. Let's get into the final werewolf stat block. Alright. Yes, you are seeing that correctly. You don't need to adjust the brightness on your monitors or your phones or your glasses. This is a lycanthrope giant werewolf. And this is a hill giant, as if they have contracted lycanthropy. This one was a bit of a challenging one because I still had to keep the giant stuff in with the werewolf. So this is a late game boss fight, or this is an entire campaign arc monster, because you could have a bunch of giants that are nearby that are somewhat, you don't want to say peaceful, but you know, they're easily dealt with. You know, they're hill giants. We know how to deal with hill giants. Now suddenly a hill giant gets bit by a werewolf and he turns into a werewolf, and then he starts turning his other hill giant kin into werewolves, and suddenly you have a bunch of giant werewolves running around. Let's look at this stat block. Break it down. Under special trait, well, sorry, let me look at the stats first. So it's got hill giant hit points, and this is my hill giant that this is based off of, keep in mind. So it's got much higher speed. 60 foot as a giant, 75 as the werewolf. 21 strength, 13 dex, 19 con. It's got really low intelligence though, so these are really stupid still, just like a hill giant. And their charisma is also really low, but their wisdom is pretty high. They have saving throw proficiencies unlike a regular hill giant. 10 strength, 9 con, 7 wisdom. It's going to be hard to get them to fail certain saving throws. Athletics and perception. I didn't give him anything else like survival and nature because I feel like you have to be smart to actually be good at that stuff, and he's probably not smart. So the big thing that changed in its special traits, it's like lycanthropic regeneration is 20 hit points at the start of its turn now, and its feral takedown does much more damage, 2d10, and if you're injured it's 2d12. So let's look at the actions, shall we? Okay, so let's look at the multi-attack here. This one makes 2 fist or great club attacks as the giant, or it makes 2 claw attacks, and it can replace one of those with a stomp or a bite. So when it's bloodied, it still makes 4 claw attacks, but it can substitute with 1 bite or a snatch if desired. So yeah, snatch is still on here. Let's look at its huge claws first. I put the werewolf abilities first because I'm assuming most of you are here for the werewolf. So the huge claws now do 3d8 slashing damage, and they make you bleed. So instead of being lacerated now, you are wounded, and for every hit from the claws you take 3 slashing damage at the start of your turn. So imagine if you get this werewolf down to bloodied and he hits your fighter with 4 slashing attacks. That's 12 slashing damage at the start of his turn that can continue to rise. I mean, at this level that you're fighting this thing, you're going to have clerics with a ton of spell slots that can easily heal you. You'll probably have potions, but it's going to deal a lot extra damage. And making 4 attacks that do 3d8 plus 5 slashing damage a hit, it's a lot of damage. Let's look at the next action here. We have the bite. Does 3d10 piercing damage, but if you're injured, so if you're missing any hit points, it does 3d12 instead. So that's pretty scary. And if you get bit and you're large or smaller, you're now mangled. Your movement speed is reduced by half until you receive magical healing. Yeah, it's just gotten 3 times as scary. Who would have thought when you take a werewolf and you inflate it to the size of the giant, it's pretty damn destructive. Let's look at Doombringer's Roar here. Now, if the werewolf is going to howl as a normal sized werewolf, it should probably have something a little scarier. This is something that is a recharge 6. So the werewolf unleashes a deafening, earth-shaking roar. All creatures within 60 feet that can hear it must make a DC 17 con save. On a failure, you take 6d10 thunder damage. You're frightened for 1 minute, and you're deafened until the end of your next turn. If you're frightened, you can repeat the saving throw at the end of each turn, but you have disadvantage if the werewolf is within sight. On an epic failure, if you fail by 5 or more, you are also paralyzed until the end of your next turn. On a critical failure, if you fail this with a natural 1, you drop to 0 hit points unconscious. And you don't just get immune to this after succeeding the saving throw, because I don't think you can get used to hearing something that is the size of a giant howling in anger. Imagine if you're in a village and you hear this thing howling from miles away, and you hear from it moving closer to the city. That's going to be terrifying. Enough to give you a heart attack if you fail the natural 1. So I think that's pretty cool. Pretty damn cool. Let's look at the weapon attacks. So you got your classic hill giant stuff. You have your huge great club. Now I'm going to be adding this to the regular hill giant. You're crippled if you get hit by this. If you're large or smaller, you get your movement speed reduced by 10. Now keep this in mind, that doesn't stack with the bite attacks version of Mangled, where your movement speed is reduced by half. It's just whatever does the most amount of movement speed reduction, that's what takes precedent. So you can't have hindered, crippled, and mangled all at the same time. It's only one or the other. So you have your boulder. So yes, the giant werewolf, before he turns into the giant werewolf, he can throw boulders still. He still has stomp. Doesn't have his fist anymore, but his claws can be used as the giant, because I feel like his fingernails probably would have grown out. Now, the stomp can still be used as the werewolf form too. So stomp enjoyers in the chat, are you here? Comment down below if you're a stomp enjoyer. We do have snatch still. Don't worry. We're not getting rid of snatch anytime soon. So, if this giant has snatch, what, pray tell, are its bonus actions, DM Dungeon Mastery? Well, hey, little Jimmy Dungeon Master, I'm glad you asked me what they are, because if we look at the bonus actions here, we have Crush still, but Crush now deals more damage if you're not at full hit points. So, just like the theme of the werewolf, it gets more savage if you're hurt, because it smells blood and it wants to devour you. But I took away, bite and smash and all that because it doesn't need it, because it has devour. So, yes, the giant werewolf monster can swallow you whole. So let's read this one. The giant lycanthrope savagely devours a grappled creature. It deals 6d10 piercing damage, and if you're injured, it does 6d12 instead. So already, that's terrifying. If this damage reduces you to 0 hit points, your body is obliterated, torn apart by the massive gnashing teeth of the giant werewolf. If you're large or smaller, you are swallowed whole. Humanoids and giants must succeed on a DC 17 con save or be cursed with werewolf lycanthropy. So yes, when it hits you with Devour, you take all that damage, and you have to make the save or become a werewolf. Or get cursed with werewolf lycanthropy, at least. Now, while you're swallowed, you're blinded, restrained, you have total cover against attacks and other effects outside, and you take 12d4 acid damage at the start of each of the lycanthrope's turns. If the lycanthrope takes 40 damage or more in a single turn from a creature inside of it, the lycanthrope must succeed on a DC 20 Constitution saving throw at the end of that turn, or regurgitate the creature, which falls prone in a space within 10 feet of the lycanthrope. So, hopefully, I was able to accurately convey a giant werewolf. I didn't really know what else to add to the stat block other than making it incredibly scary, but it still shows that it's a giant. I didn't want to make it too convoluted, but it's already a big stat block, so I know some of you are probably screaming in the comments right now, "It's too cumbersome! Make it smaller!" Don't worry, my son. Don't worry. I have an abbreviated form of this, and it's going to be in the Discord once this video goes live. So, with that being said, I'm DM Dungeon Mastery. I hope you really enjoyed this werewolf rework, and I will see you all in the next one. Halloween's coming up, so get ready for a lot of spooky, scary stuff. I got some ideas for the Discord and the Patreon, thinking about making some one-shot adventures with some of the creatures I've reworked based on what is voted on. But I want to start doing some demons, so I think the Barlgura will be next in the Creatures But Better series. So I'll catch you all in the next one. Remember, be careful when you enter the woods at night, lest you run into a werewolf.